Kansas City Young Adult BSF. My name is Connor Moylan.
And I'm Marisa Moylan. You didn't do it right. It's the Young Adult Podcast.
Would you like me to try again?
No, go ahead. Welcome to the KC Young Adult Podcast. We're glad that you're here with us tonight. Connor's going to talk about Lesson 23, Jesus' Arrest and Jewish Trials. He has lots of fun, geeky things to share with us this evening.
Okay.
I don't know what you're sharing with us, so I'm just assuming it's nerdy.
Well,
I wanted to give them a public service announcement if they'd like to skip today.
perfect. Thank you. So, well, one of the major things that I brought up in my lecture, but we didn't talk about at all.
Can you, maybe before you hop in, remind us what you talked about in your lecture? What's happening?
Perfect.
We haven't been here in a while.
Yep.
We had spring break.
Yeah. So we're picking up with the arrest of Jesus here. We're in John chapter 18. So Jesus, John 18 picks up with Jesus sort of leaving and going to go pray. Mm-hmm. We don't get as much detail about that as we do in the other Gospels. But then Judas comes and shows up with some people, a lot of people, to come and get him. So one major thing to talk about was just that. So Jesus, when Peter cuts the guy's ear, Jesus says to Peter, and this is in John 18, verse 11, "Put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me?" So, when you read that, what comes to mind? Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me?
Well, I think of the cup of wrath.
Yeah.
But I also went back and read the Matthew verse that tells me that. I think, is it Matthew? Doesn't Matthew tell us that?
Does Matthew specifically say that the cup of wrath is the cup?
I think it might. I think in Matthew 20. I also think BSF had you go back and read that. So, but also before I did my lesson and then discussed, I think about like Jesus drinking the cup, like that he's taking like on like our sins. Yeah. And like I think about the symbolism to like communion that we like drink the cup as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that has any connection, but that's what I think about.
Just asking what you thought about. So do you know where to look, where in the Bible we would look to find anything else about the cup of wrath, like in the Old Testament?
Well, you are open to Jeremiah, so I guess we're going to Jeremiah.
Look at that.
Yeah.
So it's an image used by the prophets, sort of. And Jeremiah uses it pretty vividly. So if you want to turn to Jeremiah 25, verse 15, or if you want
I just want to think like they had you go back to Matthew 26 because that's when he's like praying in the garden and the disciples all fall asleep and he talks about like drinking the cup.
Yep.
So that's where they had you go back to. Anyway, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, with God.
Yep.
Take the cup.
Yep. Okay, so you said Jeremiah. I'm with you now.
Yep. So Jeremiah 15. There's also some found in Isaiah that's pretty similar, but I think the Jeremiah one is maybe the most descriptive. So,
I mean, it literally says the cup of God's wrath.
The cup of God's wrath. The whoever put that in there really wanted you to know.
Yep, got it.
Really wanted you to know what this was about. So this is so Jeremiah 25 is when he's talking about what's going to happen and how they're going to go into captivity by the Babylonians. And so this cup of God's wrath is kind of the one of the images that talked about how this is like a divine punishment, or divine judgment, maybe is a better word than punishment, from God. So picking up here in Jeremiah 25, verse 15. "Thus the Lord, the God of Israel, said to me, Take from my hand this cup of the wine of wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. They shall drink and stagger and be crazed because of the sword that I am sending among them." So, and then it says, "So I took the cup from the Lord's hand and made all the nations to whom the Lord sent me drink it." It starts with Jerusalem, but then it goes all the towns. And then it says, and after them, and even ends with, and after them the king of Babylon. shall drink.
Wow.
And then it kind of goes on here in verse 27. Then you shall say to them, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, drink and be drunk, vomit and fall, rising no more because of the sword that I am sending among you. And it goes on more, but I think that kind of gets the image across. So just the idea is sort of like that this, that we've been, God is merciful, but he does need to bring judgment and justice down on. And that in this time, in this place, the form of judgment was God sending Babylon to wipe the nations out, Mm-hmm. And then, God sends Babylon to wipe the nations out. And that's but even they're not above facing, the judgment at the hand of God and different things like that. So, anyways, that's kind of where the image is. And I think it's be kind of cool when you think about Jesus and like being standing in of like for Israel, kind of like in this political timeline, Israel is the people of Israel are like gonna rebel. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're not like following God's commands. They're not loving their neighbors very well. They're trying to rebel. And eventually Rome, like Babylon, brings the heavy hand down on them.
Right.
And I think in a very real sense, this is drawn out more in Matthew's gospel than in John's. But invoking the cup of wrath makes me think of this. Like Jesus tried to die for Israel so he could avoid that, they could avoid the cup of wrath that was coming to them. But they rejected him and it came anyways, Right. So I think what's so cool about reading this stuff is just how many levels Jesus is working on. Because, the level we're most familiar with, the level we're going to talk about here more at BSF, because it's, it definitely is more applicable, is that like, he drinks the wrath for you and me too. And what we probably wouldn't have Babylon, the actual nation come and wipe us out, but there would be some sort of, equivalent evil that if we, that basically we get handed over.
Right.
You get handed over to it.
You could think about even like being handed over to your son.
Yeah. Yeah, like, I can even speak from, I think wine is a really good example of like, I can think of times. Yeah. If you drink too much, like you will get what you want, but what you want is not good, actually.
Yeah, I think about like people who have made like maybe like bad choices, whether like one thing that like pops in my brain is like cheating on like a partner, and like how like they like in the moment they're like, oh, this would be the better option, but then like in the long run, after all the consequences, they like realize it isn't, in the sense they've like had their cup of wrath. So that's interesting to think about. That's like to me that's like really extreme. I think there's like small things like indulgences of like alcohol and food and media, and like for me is like spending time doing whatever I want to do, and
and what's interesting is because like to do on the Babylon, like I think that works with the Babylon example, because Israel invited Babylon in and like showed off all their storehouses and like all those things, and it was like, it's like, okay, this is who you want to partner with, this is who you want to play with, like this is what is going to happen.
Right. And there's a lot of warnings against them too.
Yeah, and so I just think, I just find that to be a very rich metaphor. So, and then another place that's interesting where it pops up is, and this is a preview for next year, is Revelation 18, verse, I think it's, when I looked at my Bible, I saw where it was. Revelation 18:6. So this is about the fall of Babylon. And 18:6 says, pay her back as she herself has paid back others. Repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double portion for her in the cup she mixed. So obviously, like, if we're, we don't need to get into every layer that John gets into here, because we have an entire BSF study going over that next year. But just the idea of like, God may have used Babylon, God may use not great things as the instruments, but he will judge them too, and they will end up getting the double portion.
Yeah.
For what they have done as well.
Yeah. It makes me think about King Nebuchadnezzar.
Yes, I mean that's who I think that's referring to there.
Yeah.
And then the king of Babylon shall drink. Yeah. I mean, it's.
Yeah, and like how he was like a cow.
Mm-hmm.
It's just crazy.
Yes.
Okay.
So, any other questions or thoughts on God's wrath? The cup of wrath, more specifically.
I feel like the word wrath is like very scary. Like it makes me cringe.
Why?
I feel like it makes me think about you remember Old Testament God.
Yeah, crazy Old Testament.
Yeah, God. Or like fire and brimstone. Not that God can't have wrath, and we read a lot about God's wrath last year, and not that Jesus isn't hasn't been upset.
Yeah.
I don't know. That word is really powerful. I don't know, it gives me the heebie-jeebies. I'm I don't put your wrath on me.
Yeah, no.
Don't have your lightning strike.
Yeah, no. I think the implication probably because of how it gets used in the
Yeah, I think
in the scriptures
Yeah.
is what gives a lot of its weight.
Yeah.
One thing that I haven't fully put my thoughts together, but I remember they talked about it on a Bible project. In Genesis, the word that gets translated as wrath, you don't actually really see. It's when God's wrath is actually first poured out upon his the people who are basically in covenant with him.
Right.
And then break the covenant, aka Israel, which they do
a lot,
all the time. So that's always been interesting to me. Of somehow God's wrath is tied in with being his people or being a covenant, and that's where it's first,
Yeah,
that word is
thinking
used.
about the snake on the pole where they sin. And he sends down the snakes, but then he saves them by putting a snake. They have to look at the snake, but he saves them from his own wrath.
Yeah. That's why that's a good.
Yeah, that stuff makes me oh.
What do you mean? Or why?
Because I can be a stupid Israelite too.
Yeah.
So I think it's just I think it makes me look inward.
Mm-hmm.
And analyze my own.
Yeah. So. But also that one, if you you appear on Jesus, you look at the snake on the stick, aka you look at Jesus.
Yeah.
You'll be saved from it.
Yeah.
So that's a really cool one. So I think the only other major thing that I had in here was just talking about. I'd mentioned a little bit about this Anas character.
Mm-hmm.
So he's kind of he's the power behind the throne. And so in Jewish tradition, if you were the high priest for life, right? Yeah. But when Rome's ruling, they don't really view the high priest like that. They view it more as a political position and something to do. So Anas is removed when he's as high priest, when he's decently young, but. I think a lot of Jews would have still considered him the real high priest before he died.
Got it.
Just because that's how they viewed their high priest.
Right.
And obviously he seems to be a pretty politically savvy operator if he keeps managing to get his kids or his in-laws on the throne, because who he needs to appeal to there is Rome.
Yeah.
Pontius Pilate is Caiaphas was the high priest before Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate could have removed him.
Right.
Whenever he wanted. So just seeing at the upper levels of Israel, they're really enmeshed with the Roman Empire, while the people really want to topple it. But what I think is interesting is
which is so interesting because even though they probably didn't want to topple it, but the people that Jesus was interacting with did. Yeah.
Or maybe they in a vacuum they wanted to topple it, but they were realistic, and by that point you're once you start making compromises with power and it becomes pretty easy to want to stay that way.
Yeah, that's true.
So, the only one thing I want to talk about was just it's these trials are, they're really shams of one.
They're not real.
Yeah, but it's just a classic example of the people who are supposed to be upholding the law can't follow the law at all.
Yeah.
You know, like one, the high priest, he's not the real high priest, you know.
Right.
He doesn't have the authority to drag Jesus away, but they're the first one he goes to. 2, there's supposed to be, it's not supposed to be like this secret that, you know, I think it's supposed to be more public. And then 3, they're supposed to be witnesses. And like they just like kind of grill Jesus.
Right.
So just an example, just like a pretty classic example of like the Pharisees are more interested in the law, and at least in my opinion, what we see the Pharisees are more. I'm sure some of them are more genuinely really interested in following the law, right? But it seems like when you get higher up, it's all about just like serving self, staying in control, being in power.
Yeah. So, okay, so I was going to bring up something because I did think about this. When we were talking about Peter, we were talking about like the light versus the darkness and how he like stays in the dark, though we know like Jesus calls us to come to the light. So when I think about that, like the Pharisees are representing the darkness, right? Because they're doing it in the dark, they're doing it secretly, everything's hidden, it's all covered. And like we know that John like intertwines this throughout his whole gospel, and I feel like we've been able to like pick it up. But I think that's really interesting to think about.
Oh, yeah.
And so Jesus, in a sense, he's calling the light out. I mean, because he says, like, if I said something wrong, testify. So what is wrong?
Yep.
Like, so he's, you know, he's being sassy to them, but he's also calling them out on their, like, on their issues, their problems.
Yeah.
Their lies.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who, if I do something wrong, my first instinct is to hide it. You know, is to keep it hidden, is to shove it into the darkness.
Yeah.
You know, it is, I can be like Peter in that way, you know?
Yeah.
Of like staying in the dark because you're scared, because you're nervous, because you're fearful, because you don't know what to do. You still want to, if he's, you know, just hopefully nobody finds out.
Yep.
But the light is better. And so, yeah, just that verse, and just like the people love darkness more than they love the light. My goal is just to not be like that. That has stuck with me all
and
year.
like, God doesn't like the darkness.
No.
So he's going to make it come forth.
Yeah.
Which makes me like I was listening to the podcast and they were talking about that like a lot of like, it feels like a lot of like Christian like figures that have passed, like a lot of other stuff is like coming out. Yeah. And it's just like, I think it's just like a good reminder as like lay humans that are not getting published or like, you know, like, that like, it's like really important to like, even us that maybe we're not going to get our names blasted like some of the other ones, that like it's important for us to like bring it out into the light and like be able to like intimately share and like wrestle with those things and like be able to have those conversations and have those safe people that like you're safe with and like you know that you can share with.
Yeah, and just to remain in the light.